Good morning and welcome back. This is World Talks coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Jastrzębska. Ukraine and Russia have agreed to a temporary ceasefire starting at 1 p.m. GMT on Saturday to mark Orthodox Easter. But this is only a short pause in what remains an intense and ongoing conflict, one that still shows no real signs of ending. To discuss the current situation on the front lines, as well as the diplomatic prospects for a potential lasting peace deal, I'm joined by Petras Auštrevičius, Lithuanian MEP Renew Europe Group. Good morning, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So let's start with a joint statement by the foreign ministers of Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania, issued in response to Kremlin outlets spreading claims that the Baltic states were actively allowing Ukraine to use their airspace to attack Russia. Do you see this as another provocation on Russia's side or a potential escalation?
Well, indeed, the Russian side uses any opportunity, any in fact, any arguments to blame Western neighbors, namely the Baltic states, as well as Poland in particular. And they try, to present all of us as instigators, as being acting, in fact, actively against the Russian interest. But what is interesting, if Russians are following any technical logic in this regard, where is Belarus? Because if those, so to say, Ukrainian drones flying via Baltic airspace and hitting Russian energy spots on near the St. Petersburg city, so they should overfly Belarus, but we hear nothing in this regard. So why Belarus doesn't act as it is an ally to Russia? In fact, this is once again, I would call a provocation. It's an opportunity for Russian side to to highlight our support for Ukraine in a way as accusing us actively supporting Ukraine in a war against Russia. But I regard this statement as very timely. It puts down any Russian arguments out of the table. But, I guess nothing can stop Russian disinformation for the time being.
So let's stick with Russia for a moment, as Kirill Dmitriev has arrived in the United States for talks with the Trump administration as temporary U.S. sanction relief on Russian oil expires today, that is on Saturday. So a possible extension has sparked debate in Washington and concern among allies, with critics warning it could weaken pressure on Russia, while supporters point to energy security and inflation and all that. So how do you gauge this?
Well, in fact, I see the situation as very worrisome. More visits, more bilateral meetings between Dmitriev and Witkov and Russian and American delegations. I see absolutely unpredictable outcomes of those negotiations and not in favor of Ukraine or European allies, generally speaking. So that's why, indeed, I see a lot of prevailing commercial and in this regard, Russia has something to offer, indeed, and they do have what to offer to American side. And sometimes I have a feeling that more commercial, more one-time, interest prevail over these strategic issues which we are dealing now as Russian increase to Ukraine as well as to European security. So that's why I don't see it as a process which comes in a good cooperation and good coordination with the European partners, and it's more, as I said, one-time and probably more commerce-based meetings and negotiations.
Now on to some good news. The Easter ceasefire starts today at 1 p.m. GMT. So this is a positive sign, certainly. But do you think it could be a prelude to the much-awaited peace talks. I mean, just the other day, Volodymyr Zelensky said that a trilateral meeting could take place in the near future, though the format of the talks remains unclear. So what's your assessment of the current diplomatic situation?
Well, in fact, let's not forget that President Zelensky been asking and offering the Russian side many times long ago. I mean, for ceasefire over the Orthodox Eastern holidays, and it was never accepted by the Russian side. And now, when Putin made this statement, of course, I mean, the Ukrainian side indeed made the same statement, and I hope at least certain ceasefire will prevail over the weekend. But judging from the recent Peskov spokesperson of Kremlin statement that Russia doesn't need any ceasefire, it's looking forward towards, as he said, lasting and sustainable peace. And what kind of a peace on the Russian side might explain us. But they're not interested in ceasefire. They are looking forward to continue military campaign, especially when more dry period comes in Ukraine after early springtime. So that's why I'm not really optimistic that this precedent will be, taken as expanded and used in coming months.
Now, there's another important political variable, the Hungarian elections taking place tomorrow. And Peter Magyar is leading in the polls. If, and I know it's a big if, he wins, do you see him reversing Hungary's veto on EU funds for Ukraine? I mean, the first payment to Ukraine under this 90 billion euro loan could happen within days if Hungary lifts its veto. So could this be a game changer?
It could be a big game changer of Hungarian-Ukrainian relations, and I hope that Peter Magyar, who might be the next prime minister, will take a very responsible, forward-looking and towards good neighborly relations developing policy line. Good luck for him in this regard, and I guess will be a very quick, a very sincere response from the Ukrainian side in this situation. And definitely, it's a great interest of the European Union, generally speaking, since a lot of troubles might be, taken out of the table, and Hungary might become again a kind of the normal member state of the European Union, being committed and honoring its decisions and already positions taken. So that's why it is both for Ukraine and for might be absolute relief from an unsustainable situation in which we are for the time of being. And I'm looking forward cautiously but optimistically towards Sunday's election in Hungary.
So let's turn to the military aspect of this conflict. Former CIA Director, retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus recently said that Ukraine is rapidly becoming the most important military-industrial complex in the free world. Do you agree with this statement?
Definitely so. I mean, especially looking at the new technologies and these unmanned flying objects, or drones, as we call it in a broader sense. For 26, there have been reports that Ukraine will be able to produce up to 7 million, starting from, hundreds of thousands, I mean, probably 3-4 years ago. Ukraine is developing in this regard. There are many technological and technical innovations every week, almost on a weekly basis, applied in producing and developing new war technologies and new weapons in Ukraine. Ukraine become an absolutely indispensable partner for, in particular, European, but as far as I know, as well as American producers and partners, testing, improving, and going forward. So that's why Ukraine become really a very serious defense and military partner globally, even in terms of Middle East conflict. And I don't see any end in this story. I guess Ukraine will show results, good developments in months and years to come.
So Ukraine has increasingly been targeting Russian oil and gas infrastructure. And President Zelensky has said that some allies have urged Kyiv to scale back these attacks amid concerns over global fuel prices, but that Ukraine would only do so if Russia stops targeting its infrastructure. So do you think that Ukraine will adjust its approach under pressure? And which partners are most likely to be applying that pressure? Because we don't know that.
I think you absolutely logically, from the war point of view, Ukraine's drones hit and missiles hit Russian oil storages and refineries, and Russia, it doesn't supply Russian war machine with oil and other gasoline needed materials, as well as Russian exports suffering a lot, because, as we know, Russia exclusively depends on oil and gas exports globally. But indeed, some Western partners, we have, companies, commercial companies, business companies, as investors of the Russian refineries and storage companies, infrastructure as well. So that's why I guess it's much based on this, as well as probably because of the Russian complaints. And who are those receiving first complaints? I guess that's our U.S. partners. So that I would show probably my finger towards Washington, D.C. Those our partners, they might explain more, but I hope they will not stop and will not constrain Ukraine's legitimate response to a Russian war of aggression.
Peter, and before we go, let's turn to the Middle East for a moment, because talks in Islamabad are starting tomorrow. We have a reset, we all know that, but I wanted to ask you about Ukraine. How has Ukraine positioned itself in this conflict in the Middle East? How do you assess their strategy?
Well, one good thing which I await from this incoming questions in Islamabad, the sooner this war will end, the more attention Ukraine will receive. It's evident, and Ukraine needs more attention, more focus on, in particular, pushing Russian side to accept peace negotiations as a main platform for agreeing or whatsoever. And Ukraine was indeed positioned itself militarily as an important element, providing know-how as well as its anti-drone technologies to some Gulf states. By this, Ukraine, I guess, rank in defense market, global defense market, rather essentially. So that's why Ukraine's position, I guess, was very, in spite of the own need, for anti-drone defense, but Ukraine responded to the request from Gulf states immediately and in a very partnership way. So that's why I guess Ukraine again demonstrated its capacities, and as well as kind of partnership. When you come in support when somebody needs this.
Petras Auštrevičius, thank you so very much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.